Let's say you have about $120,000. Do you go with a 2021 718 Cayman GT4, or do you go with the 2023 C8 Corvette Z06, no Z07 package, but this is the convertible with the 3LZ. Both are valued around $120K. The owner, Christian, paid $118,000 for his GT4, which, by the way, is the same as MSRP sticker price because Porsches just hold value so well. The MSRP was $118K, whereas the owner's Scion paid about $125K for this, but the sticker was $145. Both are mid-engine, rear-wheel drive. Both have naturally aspirated engines. In the Porsche, we have a 4-liter flat six, making 414 horsepower at 7,600 RPM, 317 pound-feet at 5,500 RPM, made it to a 7-speed PDK. 0 to 60 is rated at 3.4 seconds, and it weighs around 3,200 pounds. It has strut front and strut rear suspension. In terms of options, we have PDLS Plus, Sport Chrono, 18-way seats, and upgraded Bose system. But keep in mind, a lot of people think this is the same as the GTS 4.0. The GT4 engine is a little bit different. So you do have a slightly higher redline of 8K versus 7,800, and it is fully dry sump, and you also get 20 more horsepower. Now with the Z06, we of course have the LT6 engine. That's a 5.5 liter naturally aspirated V8 with a flat plane crank, making 670 horsepower at 8,400 RPM and 460 pound-feet at 6,300 RPM, and that's made it to an 8-speed DCT. 0 to 60 is rated at 2.6 seconds, but this is a lot heavier. This weighs in around 3,650 pounds because if you get the convertible, you have about a 100-pound penalty over the hardtop. And this has double wishbone, both front and rear, which at least on paper is going to be superior than the Cayman. Now keep in mind, we have 62% more power in the Corvette, but only 11% more weight. So the power to weight ratio, we have 7.85 pounds per horsepower with the Cayman GT4 versus only 5.37 pounds per horsepower in the C8 Z06. In terms of mods on the Porsche, we have Apex EC7RS wheels. That's 19 by 9 in the front, 19 by 11 in the rear, wrapped in RT660 rubber, 245 front and 295 section width in the rear. We have a Soul X-Pipe race exhaust, Ferodo DS 3.12 brake pads, some aero, including the canards in the front, and of course, this massive wing. And as always, the full mod list is down in the description. Yeah, that exhaust is definitely not stock. Gotta love the Porsche interiors. Very purpose-built, high quality, classic. Gets the job done, and I like the new modern shift lever. It almost looks like a manual. Looks a lot better than the prior. But holy drone! There's no more controllable valve. It's just always open, and this is not a quiet car. I don't envy Christian driving this on the highway. And not sure what his alignment is, but this is a very sharp front end. I'm sure he's running, as you guys can see, he obviously tracks this vehicle, right? And I'm sure he has a far more aggressive alignment than stock. And we're going to enable both PDK Sport and PASM. These engines aren't torque monsters. They reward you by revving them out all the way to 8K. Getting a better rotation on throttle, sharp front end, following your exact command. Water bottle holding on for dear life. Oh, there we go. There we go. See, the Caymans, they have this bad rap for being too clinical, too boring, too sterile. But when you actually start pushing them and start playing around with the weight, you can get them to actually get the tail out and slide. And even the GT4, which is not anywhere as stiff as the GT4RS, which, by the way, we also did a comparison of a Z06 with the Z07 package versus a Cayman GT4RS. but these are so drivable on the road. In terms of the suspension tuning, the comfort, and the PDK, is it as sharp as the GT4 RS? Obviously not, but it's still faultless, right? Like, you can't really criticize it. The only reason you know that this PDK could be better, could be faster, could be sharper, is simply because the GT4 RS and other, you know, GT 911s exist. Smooth, quick shifts. Love these brakes. They're so firm and easy to modulate. They have that modern Porsche feel, which is just such a joy to use. I wish all cars had brakes like these. The shift logic in PDK Sport is actually pretty well dialed for when you're pushing the car harder. And even with PASM engaged on this suboptimal road, I mean, sure, I'm getting some of that higher frequency texture, but it's not punishing at all. You know, the more Cayman GT4s I drive, both on street and on track, I'm starting to notice a trend here, which is that the GT4 is an excellent car. You can totally street drive it. It is not only for the track. Even the GT4 RS isn't as harsh as I recalled. I recently reviewed one against that Z06. And what I would say is that when you're on the track pushing it to 9 or 10 tenths, then you're going to see the limitation of the strut suspension. But on street, and if you're pushing it up to 8 tenths on track, you don't actually notice a limitation. The issues you see on track, you can actually find in our other videos reviewing the Cayman on track. And, you know, the toe change at the rear, that added instability, the way the front end can kind of push, the rear can snap. That only happens when you're really pushing it to the ragged edge. And let's give you a pull. Even going uphill here right now, nowhere near as much power as that C8 Z06, but this is no slouch. When a car weighs only around 3,200 pounds, having more than 400 horsepower is plenty. Really enjoying the steering here as well. This is actually better than most GT4s. I wonder how much of that is the alignment, wheel tire setup as well. You're getting such good feedback for an E-Pass. These gears here are so incredibly long though. Even in the PDK, you're largely just staying in one gear, going up and down the rev range. Even over some of these larger bumps, you can feel the rear starting to get a little bit upset, starting to shimmy around. This car is so beautiful on the corners. And I love that the PDK lets you downshift right up to red line. Now normally in a car with stock exhaust, you'd be able to close the valves and then all of a sudden this car would be so quiet and comfortable and serene. Obviously, the current mods, that's not going to be the case. the suspension still on the stiffer side, but definitely not punishing. Now, is the engine as special as the GT4RS? Obviously not. It's not a proper GT3 engine in a Cayman GT4. You have to go all the way up to the RS for that. But I mean, for 120K, you get such incredible driving experience. My favorite thing about modern Porsche GT cars is simply the inputs. They have the ergonomics perfect. Whether you go PDK or manual transmission, both are excellent. Steering is impeccable. The pedal box, the pedal calibration, the brake feel, it's just phenomenal. And then you have the excellent build quality. Is it the most fancy, gonna wow you interior? Obviously not. The German way is more understated and more about the quality and the reliability. The whole car, it makes sense why these GT Porsches hold their value so well. I mean, the car had 16,000 miles when Christian bought it, and the used market value was the same as MSRP, right? You don't see that often in the car world. But let's say you have 120K and you want to try out the American way. Let's see how it compares. All right, the C8 Z06 now. 3LZ is essentially the interior tech and comfort package. You got things like these upgraded GT2 seats. You got a lot of carbon fiber. You have an HUD, all that stuff. This is the top trim. There's 3LZ, 2LZ, 1LZ, and then of course the Z06. The main thing with the Z06 package is you get that LT6 engine, but you also get MagneRide 4.0 standard. You get upgraded cooling, a different transmission and final drive gearing, wider tracks, different springs, larger 20 and 21-inch wheels front to rear versus the standard 19 and 20, upgraded brakes, and so on. Now keep in mind a big tire difference. We have PS4S rubber here, which is stock from factory. You have to get the Z07 if you want the Cup 2. So PS4S versus proper 200 treadwear track rubber, which is the RT660s on the GT4. So that's gonna obviously have lower limits with the Z06, but also influence the steering feel because the 200 treadwear tires have far stiffer sidewalls, which actually helps with steering feel versus the PS4S, which are gonna be quite a bit softer. What I always find funny is that just about everyone I know drives with the steering wheel telescoped all the way out in most modern cars, regardless of their height. So Scion is several inches shorter than me, but he also has the steering wheel fully out. I have to push the seat back, which tells me that car manufacturers should actually allow the steering wheel to telescope out even further so that not everyone has to max it out. All right, thanks for listening to my TED Talk. We got this cliff of buttons, which is very polarizing. I think it's unique. It makes the Corvette interior different than everything else. We have this very awkward and polarizing square steering wheel. I think it's far uglier than what we have in the Lotus Emira. This one is optioned with the front axle lift option, which is like $2,500. Now we got the rear window cracked ever so slightly, and you'll see why in just a moment. Now, first impressions, I love how quiet and tame the Z06 can be compared to that GT4, where that was just assaulting your ears constantly. Now, I'm in Tour right now. The suspension, the MagneRide 4.0, is like, it's very impressive technology because it has a very wide range of, you know, adaptive damper stiffness to softness. So it can get quite compliant, but even right now, it's actually a little bit bouncy. And I wonder if it's because the car weighs like 500 pounds more than the Cayman. They still have to keep it stiffer to have some decent body control. But, I mean, in my prior video of the Z06, Z07 versus the Cayman GT4RS, that Z06 was a lot more comfortable than the GT4RS. But in this instance, I'm actually surprised that the Z06 is not necessarily more comfortable than that Cayman GT4, even in Tour. But now let's turn it up, Z mode. Make the steering heavy. Let's get some better brake feel. Steering is a lot heavier all of a sudden. Not much more feel though. Oh wow! Getting some rotation on throttle, multiple corners in a row. Yeah, she wants to dance. Holy shit, man. That is the reason you get this car. That LT6 engine is insane, dude. The noise, the power delivery, the torque. The transmission is good. When you're pushing it, it's right up there with the GT4's PDK. But as I was pushing it a bit harder, the brakes, like, it's now becoming clear to me why Porsche is Porsche. They just dial in the inputs so well. The brakes here, even at the max brake feel, let's go back to the middle and see if that improves things. It doesn't have that same degree of high resolution and that same feel that you get on a Porsche. Now keep in mind, in the C8 Z06, it's actually brake by wire. So it makes sense you're not going to have the same level of feel. The steering is really heavy in this setting, but there's no additional feel. That GT4 has way better steering feel. I actually think that here in the middle setting it's a little bit more natural. The front end isn't quite as sharp as in that GT4, but that GT4 has an aftermarket alignment with additional camber. Although speaking of Christian, it's actually only -2 degrees, he was saying. I thought it would be more like 3. The steering ratio here is overly quick though. So to make the car feel more responsive, what a lot of manufacturers do is they increase the steering ratio speed to make it feel like it's changing direction fast. And even with that though, you still feel the extra 500 pounds. But then you get on the throttle and then you don't really care because this engine's insane. Okay, yeah, brake feel in the middle setting actually, I think, feels better. You have this sense of feedback through the pedal, whereas when you go max, it's just like hard and kind of mushy, especially at the top, the beginning of the travel. Yeah, the middle is where I like it for both steering and for brakes. Large magnitude shift. But the thing is, the American philosophy here versus the German philosophy with the GT4 is that with the GT4, they're just going to calibrate everything so precisely that you don't need different modes, right? The steering is just always excellent. The main thing you're changing is just the suspension based on the road, right? The adaptive dampers with that PASM. But here, they're not letting you just do suspension and exhaust like in the Porsche, and I guess also the shift logic, but also the steering and the brake feel as well. And let's give you a pull. Dude, this thing is nuts, man. Revving out to an 8,500 RPM redline from a naturally aspirated flat plane V8. I mean, this is why you buy the car, is simply because of that engine. The philosophy on transmission is also different. So when you go into the more conservative shift modes, it's going to be smoother and a little bit slower. When you go into the more aggressive shift modes, it's fast and it also gives you that little torque dip and that jolt in the back of your seat, because they want you to feel that theater of each shift. Whereas again, in the Porsche, they don't change the way the shifts feel, they just change when the shift is occurring, they just change the shift logic. To rotate, even there, barely pushing it, mid-corner throttle will give you just that little bit of rotation. Absolutely delicious. A car that you can dance with on the street with lower limits, actually. Now the Magnerite dampers do have a larger magnitude shift from the softest to the stiffest setting. Here this is noticeably stiffer than the Cayman GT4 with PASM engaged. You're not going to get the same issues with strut suspension limitations in this car, because you have the superior double wishbone geometry, which means you get that dynamic camber change. You're not going to have this weird toe-in, toe-out behavior at the rear. And what that means is that when you start pushing it, you actually have a bit more confidence in a way. Actually, I'm going to restate that. The suspension is not as unpredictable as in the Cayman when you start pushing it harder. And again, you're not really reaching that limit on the street. It's going to be more so on track. And not even at 8 tenths, but 9 and 10 tenths. Or when you're going over some large bumps and getting some bump steer and etc. However, the weight here, especially on these tighter corners, you feel that weight penalty. It is very noticeable. And that actually reduces your confidence a little bit, because when the car is heavier, obviously more distance to stop, not as willing to change direction, and so on. When it comes to the interior, I think that the Porsche is going to age a lot better. It's a more traditional, simple design. Here you have these various screens. They're already getting rid of this this cliff in the newer Corvettes. So I think that'll age better for sure. In terms of the seats, these C8 seats are actually excellent, very supportive, and that lateral bolstering is, it feels good on my body. 180 pounds, 6'1". I do think that so the GT4 actually has the 18-way adjustable seats, but I do think that if Christian got the carbon bucket seats, those are phenomenal seats, especially when you tilt them back ever so slightly. They're just perfect. Back into tour mode. Yeah, again, I'm actually really surprised, because from my recollection of driving other Z06s, when you go into the softest suspension mode, normally you don't feel as much of that higher frequency chatter, and you can feel the compliance over larger bumps. But just on a smoother, but on the smaller, higher frequency bumps, you actually get a larger degree of transmission than you might expect. So if it was my money, which one would I choose? I had an idea going into this, but after driving them both, I think it's tough to say. And let me start by saying this, which is that I value ergonomics perhaps more than the average car enthusiast, because in my prior life I was doing plastic surgery, and ergonomics and positioning and economy of movement and all that stuff was just so mission critical to the job. So I very much love what Porsche does when it comes to the inputs, the ergonomics, things like that. However, I do think that when you own a car, you can adjust to those things. And the Corvette, the steering, the brakes, the ergonomics aren't quite the same as the GT4. However, it has a much more special engine. That LT6 engine, when you compare it versus a GT4, you see a big gap. And the performance envelope is also a big gap if you do decide to take it out on track. Whereas with the Z06, with the Z07 package versus a Cayman GT4RS, in that instance, I would have gone with the GT4RS, because the gap in the engines, it's still there, but it's a lot smaller, right? And that GT4RS, that induction note as well with the carbon intakes right by your ears, is something very special. But in this instance, I mean, I feel like the Corvette C8 has a more comfortable interior most of the time. Again, we were talking about the suspension nuances. It has a greater performance envelope. If you want to take it out on track, it's going to be far quicker. And at 120K, you're getting a lot more performance with the C8 Z06. With either car, you're going to have some compromises, some limitations. With the Cayman GT4, you're not getting as special of an engine. You're getting compromised suspension geometry if you are going to be pushing it out on track. Whereas with the C8 Z06, it's mostly the weight and the inputs, but I think you can get used to the inputs, whereas with the weight, that's going to be more of a personal thing. If it was my money, honestly, hard to say. I'd probably go with the C8 Z06 at 120K, because it is such a performance bargain. But my friends, let me know what you think with a comment down below. Big shout out to the owners, Christian and Simon, for letting me review their cars. If you want your car reviewed, visit us on jabalandcars.com. Fill out that form on the homepage. Much love, my friends, and I'll see you all in that next one.